Welcome to Commander Central, episode 292, and today we'll be taking a look at group hug and just the nature of politics in general in Commander. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Mike.
Mike Allman, welcome aboard. How's it going?
It's good. I'm not normally in this space. It's comfortable here, though, so I appreciate it. How are you all?
We're doing pretty good. We're recording on a Tuesday morning, which is kind of unusual for all of us. So yeah, that's something. We're in the middle of a spoiler season as well, which I guess we always are in the middle of a spoiler season.
Right, yeah.
Seems like it. But so the magic stuff is flowing fast and furious in every direction here. So, Mike, why don't you just introduce yourself, tell everyone where they may know you from.
So, I'm Mike Almond. I also go by Nerdworks from time to time. I am one of the hosts of the Social Contract and EDH Podcast. Also on Twitch, doing a whole bunch of variety stream stuff with a variety of people at Nerdworks Media. And yeah, frankly, they might know me from a time that you came onto our channel and beat me up. For one of our Magic games. But yeah, that's where you can find me for the most part.
So how long have you been actually playing Magic, and when did you start with EDH, or did you transition into that at some point?
I feel like it's one of those things where everybody, if you talk to 10 Magic players, I'd say 80% of them have the story where they played Magic a long time ago, and then they took a big break. Whether it's because, just cards got expensive, or I fell out of love with the format, or whatever, and then came back to it. And that's what happened with me. I played, I guess it would be considered Legacy back then. I'm not really sure. But I played and then took a big break, moved into a place with a bunch of nerdy friends that got me into EDH and went, oh yeah, this is way better. So that's where I'm at now.
Nice.
So, Mike, you are closing in on 50 episodes of the Social Contract and EDH podcast. What made you guys start that show?
Honestly, it was the idea of, I had always talked to Alex about whenever I didn't understand how something worked rules-wise, I would usually call him up and ask him, and he enjoyed answering these questions because he's a judge, so he likes getting those questions. And I was like, oh, you know what? It's kind of terrible right now because we're all stuck inside anyway. So I've got the free time to start a new project. I enjoy having these conversations. Maybe other people would enjoy having these conversations or listening to us have these conversations, I guess. So here we are.
Did you have a plan initially, like, were you guys like, okay, we're going to do this and we're just going to do, it for the duration of the pandemic, or let's just do it and see what happens, or like, hey, we want to grind out 500 episodes? Was there any end goal here, or was it just kind of flying by the seat of your pants?
The only real goal when we got started was the idea of let's just do this until it stops being fun.
Well, that's a good way to handle it, I suppose.
Right, because the thought process of we're going to do this, and, I mean, you all can speak to this very well. The idea of, we're going to do this until this can be our full-time job is unreasonable. Right. Because it's adding another full-time job and hoping that people will listen. But it was just, you know what, let's do this until it starts feeling like work that we're not looking forward to, and we haven't hit that point, so I'm happy to keep going.
So you just mentioned your co-host Alex, and just curious about where you met, where you know him from, that type of fun stuff.
So I originally lived in St. Louis, Missouri, and that's where Alex lives now as well, and we met at a local game shop called Game Night in St. Louis. Shout out Game Night. But I went there because I had been there before, just checking out, stuff, buying cards and getting some Dungeons and Dragons stuff. I'm a diverse nerd. But they told me that they had a Commander Night. And I was like, oh, great. And I showed up, and I'm this gregarious person, but I got there a little late and everybody was in the middle of games, so I didn't want to just new guys peeking over people's shoulders or anything like that. Didn't know how structured and competitive everything was. And Alex, put himself out there to say, hey, I kind of run the things here. How are you doing? And made me very comfortable, brought me into the fold. And we just had a friendship blossomed from there to the point where I moved halfway across the country, and it was still a contact that we made, and kept talking, and the idea of being able to play games and talk Magic, especially when everything is terrible outside, just kind of worked out.
Well, that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah, I mean, because it wasn't really that different with us. I mean, I was playing at a shop with another friend when Max came in, because he heard there was actually Commander players showing up at the shop, and started playing with Max. And then Chris came in for something else. He's like, "Why are those guys playing with giant decks?"
That's the weirdest standard deck I've ever seen. What are you doing?
Yeah, right. And that was like, I don't know, 7 years ago now. Like that's just how it happens with Magic. It seems like.
No, absolutely. It's the reason that I prefer EDH and why it got me back into everything is not just the fact that it's multiplayer, but the fact that it's a multiplayer scenario. So there has to be interaction. It's not just I have to focus on this person because it's their turn and next it'll be my turn. There's at least 2 other people at the table that are also there and there's conversation. I love table talk. I love side talk. As long as we also know what's kind of going on at the table at the same time.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing coming back to the shop this spring after, having played on Spell Table or just generally having not played with people in a long time, in addition to having just not seen people in a long time. So suddenly everyone's back at the LGS, trying to find games, and they hadn't played in forever and hadn't seen one another in forever. And there was like a month there where it was a mess trying to because everyone was just talking, and then someone else would come in that you hadn't seen in 6 months because of COVID. And I'm like, hey, how's it going? So it was very much and it's still to a degree, it's louder in our shop than it was a year and a half ago, because people are just I feel like much more grateful for the social interaction than they were pre-pandemic.
At the game shop that I'm at here, I instituted the sitcom introduction rule, where if somebody in a 90s sitcom or 80s sitcom, Full House thing, somebody came in the door, somebody came down the stairs, and there was the applause at break because you were excited to see them.
Norm!
Yeah, Norm, exactly. Cheers. I should have gone cheers, dang. But basically, it's like, okay, we got about 10 seconds. We're going to get real excited to see you. Then we're going to go back to the game. We're going to finish the game. And then we'll do all the happy talk stuff again.
Right. Well, we usually also kind of do at the end where people can find us, but people sometimes tune out then. So why don't you throw your social media stuff out there for yourself and for the podcast here at the top of the show so people can give you a listen when they want to.
Haha, hear that? We tricked you all. You're stuck here. So you can find us. The podcast is, there's 45 different podcast platforms. We should be on all of them, or at least a lot of them. The Social Contract and EDH Podcast is where you can listen to Alex and I talk EDH and a whole bunch of stuff in Magic itself. You can follow us on Twitter at EDH_social, or you can go to Twitch.com and search for Nerdworks, NERDWURKS Media, and find us do a whole bunch of different things, including paper magic and video games and D&D and just all the nerdy things. That's kind of what my whole shebang is. So there you go.
And I just listened to your Stranger Things review last week. I think you guys went over all these stuff from the Stranger Things Secret Lair. That was a really good show.
Alex had this concept of, we don't want to hit we don't want to hit the secret layers too much, because the original name that we were kind of looking into for the podcast was Not Another EDH Podcast.
Sure.
And then we kind of find our own niche and our own groove. But then, the Stranger Things, after the Walking Dead Secret Lair came out, and these are legal, and there was this subtle groan because we thought, oh no, we're going to have this conversation again. But then we looked at some of the cards and we're like, oh, these definitely fit what we want to talk about. I'm actually kind of excited. We need to hit some of these specifically.
Well, we didn't want to, I think the first time we have not done a set review was for
these two sets.
For Midnight Hunt, I think, right?
Yeah.
And we didn't even really talk about it. We just we're not in the mood, so we just didn't do it. We didn't mention it on air. I don't think we even really discussed it amongst ourselves. We just were like, what do we do this week? And we just kept throwing up show topics that weren't doing a set review.
Right.
We just were like, everyone, it feels like an obligation, which I guess was not that big of a deal when you were getting 5 sets a year, but when you're getting as many as we get right now, we just did, everyone does it. We just didn't want to do one last time.
Well, I mean, I've heard the quote before that just last year, there was more new cards than there were in the first 3 sets of Magic.
Yeah.
And then this year, halfway through the year, we had more new cards than we did last year. So there is this, it feels like an arms race as far as all of the cards that are out there and coming out consistently. So yeah, I get to say people like us. This is cool. People like us are constantly getting these new cards and these new sets, and we gotta talk about this. We gotta talk about this. And It's fun, but man, it's draining.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, there's over 10 times as many legends in 2021 as were released in 2011.
Good Lord.
I mean, that's insane.
That's
and that was before I factored in Crimson Vow. So yeah, it's nuts.
That's a lot. That's a lot of lead singers. Holy cow. Okay, fair enough.
So speaking of that, though, we're not going to do a set review here, but since we are hip deep in Crimson Vow spoilers, and I'll throw this out there for everybody, is there anything briefly you want to talk about that you've seen so far that you're excited about, or that you're like wanting to put in a deck, or has caught your eye, whether it's an alternate frame or like the Dracula cards, anything that is jumping out at anybody? And I can start with you, Mike. Anything caught your eye so far?
So I don't want to talk about any particular cards, but I mean, my whole thing is group hug and political aspect cards, and they're leaning into that pretty hard on this set as far as, hey, this is giving value to somebody to gain value yourself, and I'm kind of digging that theme. Overall, the set looks pretty sweet. I liked Innistrad as a whole, but here in the Midnight Hunt, I'm pretty interested. I'm pretty excited.
And anything for you, Max?
I like this one better than Crimson Vow is the one we're looking at now. I like this better than Midnight Hunt, but nothing too specific that I've seen or have paid attention to close enough to actually analyze and see if it fits in the deck yet.
And you, anything from you, Chris?
I guess the only card that I really want is Chandra, be honest with you.
That Chandra's pretty sweet, though.
Yeah, I just love me some Chandra. And I want to know the story behind her, like, why is she even there at the wedding? That's what I want to know.
The alt or the borderless one with her in the full like wedding dress walking through the vampire crowd is a pretty fantastic looking card.
Yeah, I need to know the story behind this, so I hope they come out with it soon.
She's going to be the Bella of the story. She's just going to get turned and...
I am glad they finished the land cycle that they started at Midnight Hunt. I think those are really solid lands.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple people I had heard that were like, it'd be nice if they were fetchable. Well, that's true of every land, but like they do come into play untapped 95% of the time, which is always good for a duel. I just like the cycle, so I'm glad to see them finish that. We always need more lands and enemy-colored pairs as well, so that was good to see. They're doing interesting things. I think I kind of like the disturb mechanic, the way it's being used with enchantments this time around. So when the creature dies or gets discarded, and there's a ton of discard synergy as well here, you can cast it for the disturb cost and bring it back into play as an aura. That's kind of a fun use of that transform mechanic and of disturb as well. So I'm kind of into that. None of the cards have like really caught my eye, but just in a general sense, I think that's a really good use of or way to make that mechanic work. And I don't have any interest in any of the alt art, alt name Dracula cards or anything, but they all look amazing. The art on all of those is like just is photoreal and fantastic and evocative and feels just perfect. So I'm super into that aspect of it. Even if I don't want them, I can really appreciate how great they look. And the kind of frame they're using for those is really fantastic too. Okay, so now that we've quick touched on that, we usually briefly talk about any fun games we played. Did you get any games in this week, Mike, that are worth talking about?
A little over a week ago, I managed to combo off with a Feldegriff deck, which was pretty cool. I pumped up a flying Feldegriff to infinity, and whacked somebody because they were going to kill everyone.
I mean, if you're going to kill somebody with a Feldegriff, that's kind of the way you got to do it, basically.
Yeah. I was super proud to actually Voltron a Feldegriff on accident rather than do the make infinite tokens that hurt people thing. So, you discovered that your deck works a way that you didn't expect it to. But yeah, I managed to make a Feldegriff pop off. That made me happy.
Nice. And Max, have you got your zombie deck out for any reps yet?
No, I have not. I did not get to take it out over Halloween like I had planned.
Well, I'm not going to be around this week or probably the following week, but maybe we'll make sure you go to the shop when I'm back in town the week after that, and we can make it a point to get some games in.
There we go. That works.
How about you, Chris? You get any playing done at all, or are you focusing on Modern, or you just haven't had a chance for anything?
I wish I had a chance for anything right now. Everything I was focusing on last week was all Pokemon, because there's a big Pokemon tournament in the store, so I had to focus on all that because I'm one of the judges for that. So
right.
That's how my life went last week.
Well, also, our shop's getting a big renovation. They're expanding, basically doubling their space, so I'm sure that chaos interferes quite a bit as well.
Oh, it sure does.
The one I will briefly mention, I did post a picture on this on Twitter. I wanted being able to win a game at 1 life. I had gotten knocked down to 1. I was able to kill the other person with token copies of Mist Vault Bridge, which is a land, and I had put it underneath a prototype portal and was ramping with it and had got I think I had 3 or 4 copies of it out. And then after a board wipe from somebody else that cleaned my board out, though, those survive because they're indestructible lands. I was able to cast Rise and Shine to animate them because they're artifacts, put 4 counters on them, and survive at 1 life the counter swing and punch back and kill 2 people basically and won the game at 1 life with animated attacking lands.
Life is a resource, and so are animated lands, I guess.
So yeah, what are you going to do? I mean, like when you get killed by the animated land tokens, that's just a thing that happens sometimes. So that felt like a good way to take a game out. No one can complain about losing to that.
No, it's not a combo that you typically see.
Exactly. Well, if you out there in listener land would like to reach out to us and to share any fun games you played or just communicate what you think about anything in Magic, whether it's Crimson Vow spoilers or the main show topic here, Group Hug and Politics and Commander, how would you go about doing that, Chris?
Well, you can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central. And you can also find us online at searching CMDRCentral.com.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central. Check out our reward tiers such as a Decks You Play show, or just joining our community to chat and play some virtual EDH. This week we have a bunch of people to say hello and welcome to. Myra Uberg, Ben, Joshua Cornell Thomas, Jeffrey Swears, Crab Baskets, Curtis Smith, the Bant Truck 23, and Michael Barrett.
The Band Truck 23 is a pretty great name, I have to admit. That's definitely a vehicle.
I hope.
We had a contest that just wrapped up as well here at the end of October. We had 6 playmats that we were giving away, courtesy of a past guest and patron supporter, Craig Bevick. So thank you, Craig. The playmats given away on Twitter are going to Wasteland Queen, who you can find at Transsoul Alessia, Nick Bundy, who you can find at Nick S.E. Bundy, Dennis Towns, who you can find at DWTOENJES, Donnie from Filthy MTG Casuals at Pimpin73, Cinder Shadow, who you can find at Cinder_Shadow, and Emily, who you can find at OvoJ210. I have contacted all of you, so we'll be getting those playmats out in the near future, but thank you to Craig, and thank you to everyone who entered to win.
We are also giving away a Commander Collection Green donated by Craig DeBevick to one lucky Patreon supporter, and that supporter is Paul Mendoza. So, Paul, we will shoot you a message just to verify some address information, but congratulations.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who supported us, everyone who entered in that contest, and everyone who just listens to the show. It means a lot, so thank you all very much. Whether you're a patron supporter or you're just a listener, it all means a lot, so thanks to everyone. Okay, folks, main topic today, Group Hug and politics in kind of general EDH.
Woo!
And let's kind of start talking about politics. Mike, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about politics at an EDH table?
So, here's the thing. When we're talking about deck building and basically synergies and how we can manipulate the stack and all of the complicated rules that exist in Magic, I think one of the things that we always forget about is the human element. Not just the fact that people are going to make mistakes, not just the fact that it's a multiplayer game, but the entire purpose of EDH that, decides the different synergies and all of the access to the cards is the fact that it's a bigger multiplayer game, which means that you're constantly at the table with people to talk to the entire time. And unfortunately, I think that what gets lost in that is the idea that you are playing a political game almost no matter what kind of deck you're playing. Because, heck, you can always decide that you're going to attack the person that has the most stuff on board first. But how many times have you attacked somebody because they won the last game? Or because, you hit me last time. I'm gonna remember this, and the next time I get an opportunity, I'm gonna hit you. So when I think politics, I'm not thinking just the cards themselves, individually in the text, in a vacuum. I'm thinking more, if this gives me some kind of interaction with the player as opposed to just the actual battlefield, well, that means that there's a whole bunch of stuff that I can do with that. And it means that I've got a bunch of political decks that don't really feel like political decks if you just look at the deck list.
Yeah, I think there's always some aspect of politics. Like I sometimes hear people talk about politics in EDH like it's a thing that doesn't happen unless you make it happen. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there's always an element of, at the very least, discussing what's going on. This is a problem. This needs to get dealt with. Or can you stop this from happening because someone, and even though you're not like making deals or it's not an overt attempt to make an alliance, there's an implication, hey, someone needs to deal deal with this cabal coffers or we're going to lose the game. Does anyone have a response? That's politics in a way. You're saying we all need to, as a unit, figure out a way to stop this or we're going to lose. I think people miss that sometimes. Like, I think there's a lot of politics in Commander that's implicit versus explicit. And it's easy to kind of not take that into consideration when you're talking about this. So I do think it's very much something baked into the game that that's almost invisible in a lot of ways.
You're right in that it is something that is missed, but even the small things, like if somebody is casting a spell to, remove a threat, there's still going to be some kind of conversation, or at least there can be some conversation for, wait, are we sure we want to hit that? Because you're casting the spell, then you're choosing a target, right? The idea that when you go to combat and somebody says, I'm going to swing, are you going to swing this at me? Because, listen, I'll let it through and that's fine, but we got to do something about player C or something along those lines. It's not so much a formal thing. It's the conversation overall group game. The reason we call it the social contract is because it's an agreement to make the best collective experience for everyone. And I think sometimes that means you're working together about assessing the board, assessing situations. And it does get a little bit of a bad taste in the mouth kind of thing if you're just constantly trying to make deals, because then that's a lot to juggle around. But as far as just kind of talking things out, I've always enjoyed that.
Max, how about you? Like, what do you think of when you think of politics in Commander? Like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind here?
I think for me, it's like 70% the deal making and kind of like what you guys already touched on. If you blow, like, I'm fine if you blow my thing up as long as something happens to player C. I understand I have a threat, but their threat, in my opinion, is just as big, if not worse. I think it's like 70% that, and then the other 30% is the, hey, I need to attack you with this 1/1 to proc, so I can cast this card in my hand that you don't know that I have, but it's going to benefit everybody. I think it's a little bit of both. I don't know. If you ask Chris, I like to stab people in the back. So
you stole it right out of my mouth. I was going to do it too.
But no, I definitely think in my mind politics is about the deal making and maybe not always holding up those deals, because if you want to, if you have the win in your sight, maybe it's worth breaking the deal.
Well, and then you get into the kind of macro aspects of it. It's like, okay, well, it's because then you're not just paying the price for this, you're paying the price down the road where Chris is still bringing that up 6 years later.
I was going to say 7 years later, he still brings it up.
Well, I remember playing some old like Age of Empires style RTS games on the computer where you had to make allegiances in those games, and you could, backstab someone that you had for a teammate, even if it was a computer. You could make an alliance and not attack one another, and then you could backstab them. But once you did that in the game, no one else wanted to be your ally. It became much more difficult, except for you could just start a new game and like that would be reset. Whereas in Commander, that isn't quite the case. You are going to always be, as long as you're playing with people who were in that previous game, they're always going to be wary of you then once you've done that once.
You mentioned RTS, and I started thinking of playing Civilization, and Gandhi was always your best friend at the very beginning, but because he had a code error that made him like 250,000 times more aggressive than anybody else, the second that he had a military, he would backstab you. And I'm just like, oh no, is that what we're talking about here? I'm in danger.
It seems very un-Gandhi-like.
Right? It was the funniest thing ever. Sorry to digress, but they basically made his number a 0 on aggression, which in computer says it was 100%. So he was the Genghis Khan, was not a problem compared to Gandhi. The second Gandhi had any military might, war with everything, and it became funny, and they just decided to keep it going through all the other games.
How about you, Chris? What do you think about when you think of politics in Commander?
The biggest thing I think about with politics in Commander is trying to convince the table of one aspect, whether it's this person's a threat or this is what's going to happen if you don't stop them. Try to force them to use their removal spells, their anything that they could possibly have, just so you gain the advantage in the game. That's usually what I think about for politics.
Yeah, I think you can kind of break it down into kind of the subconscious or unconscious politics, the overt deal making maybe, and then the kind of group hug-esque level of politics where you're actively, it's not just about a deal, you're actively giving things away in hopes you get something back for doing that. I think that's what I think the three kind of breakdowns for me are that's how I kind of break it down. I want to come back briefly to something Mike talked about in regards to like overt deal making kind of for the sake of making deals. And that's probably the one thing about politics I don't love, and that's the thing you kind of see on game nights a little bit, and I don't mean this in a negative way towards game nights, that they're trying to be entertaining, and I think that's part of the entertainment factor. They ratchet a lot of that stuff up. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of deal making on game nights where and a lot of it feels kind of chaotic to me. It's, you have a board state on turn 5 and someone just for no apparent reasons like, I'm not going to attack Josh for 4 turns if you do this for me. And it doesn't feel like it's the smart strategic play. It feels like it's deal making for the sake of deal making. And I would guess a lot of that is just done for camera because they want to have things be entertaining and have people make jokes and it be kind of a wild thing. But I do sometimes wonder if that then bleeds over to newer players who think that's what politics in Commander is, where you are just constantly making deals, and it kind of turns into almost like a chaos state because there's almost no, like, you can't plan things out based on the board state because you never know what weird deals are just going to suddenly appear.
I could see that. I think for me, when those deals come out, sometimes I agree with you. It does feel kind of forced. But most of the times when I do see those kind of deals where it's not the person who's making the aggressive action or threatening the aggressive action, it's the person that just says, hey, I have the ability to stop something that you're doing, but it's not a problem to me yet. Give me some safe passage for a bit here because you're probably building up to something terrible. If I'm okay, if I'm not on your radar for a bit, you can keep doing what you're doing. And that's a double-edged sword because when you do that and it's just for the sake of doing it, that's one thing. But then you have to think about the other people at the table that just saw you accept this deal or make this deal, and them to say, well, now you've put a target on our backs, so we're putting a target on yours. When we get into the chaos of it, you're right, and I think I kind of enjoy that. But not every time, obviously. If it's just making deals to make deals, yeah, what's the point? All right, fine. I'm not going to kill you, and you're not going to kill me, and now we're playing Two-Headed Giant.
Right, kind of, right. Yeah, for me, kind of, I guess I will relay what my baseline that I operate at for politics, generally speaking, when I am doing something political in a game of Commander, usually kind of where it begins and ends at is that situation where this person is about to pop off and I can stop them maybe, but if I do, it's going to leave me wide open everybody else. So, hey, you other 2 players, I can stop this thing from happening. Can you not hit me for a turn if I do that or something? Like that's the level of deal making I make when I have to do something, and if I do it, it's going to make me vulnerable. I'll try to make a deal there. Beyond that, it's basically just the kind of table talk politics where, like, can someone figure this out? Or does anyone realize what's happening right now? This is about to go off. That kind of thing is about where I myself draw the line in terms of what I do politically. And I think that's, having played with Max and Chris a lot, that's basically how they do it as well. Would you say that? Is that right, Max and Chris, do you think?
Pretty much.
Yeah. In our shop kind of plays the same way too. Like I don't see a lot of really overt alliance kind of things other than like pragmatic politics when people just want to not lose and they try to make deals. But that tends to be how it is, at least where we play. Is that kind of similar to where you're at, Mike?
I'd say so. For me, politics is one of those things where I almost look at it if I'm going to make a deal or offer to make a deal or take a deal, it has to be something where both of us benefit. I'm not going to just try and, submarine the table or submarine the game because I would rather lose and shuffle up and be able to play again soon than make a deal that's just going to stretch a game out or elongate it for no good reason, right? So the idea of, hey, this player is going to win unless we deal with it. I can deal with it, but that also means that you can deal with me immediately after, and that's not fun for me. So that kind of deal making is always that's always allowed at my table. And then, just the kind of jockeying for favor and position as far as, no, don't swing at me. Come on. I haven't done anything. But yeah, it's mostly the table talk politics and then a couple of reasonable expectations and deals.
Okay, so let's jump into group hug, because you talked about that being one of your favorite things, and it is, when you think of politics, politically speaking, I mean, there are political decks in a general sense, but when you're talking about a specific political deck, group hug is what people do. Like there's, I don't know what other kind of specific political deck there is, maybe group slug, I guess, but group hug is what you think of when you think of a deck dedicated to playing politics.
Sure.
And you mentioned you had a Feldegriff deck, and that's a group hug deck, I'm assuming, basically, right?
It is. I've got, I'm at like 20-something decks at this point. I've got too many because I got that problem of I build a deck, and I like it, and then I play it, and then I stop playing it, but I don't want to take it apart. So there's a bunch of decks that are just sitting in there. But I've got a Selvala Explorer Returned, a Feldegriff, and a Kineos and Tiro.
Okay.
Those are the three main group hug decks. And, you know, it's one of those things that group hug is something that objectively, game theory, is frowned on because you're giving your opponents, because that's who they are,
right.
You're giving your opponents extra resources to then combat you with. And my counter is, and I've used the metaphor several times, instead of thinking of this as a card game, think of it as a race. And, you know, some people might be more practiced at running the race. Some people might have better equipment, better shoes, all that stuff. And it means that you're all at the same starting line, but you're prepared different based off your decks and your experience. And what I like to do is I like to give everybody a race car.
Sure.
Instead of having us run the race. And I'm the only one that knows that I'm going to have a race car at the very beginning. So I know how the car is going to run, and I know how I have to come around the turns, etc. And everybody is going to get their extra resources and extra benefits, but it's going to be really hard for them to forecast how to do it.
Yeah, so I think that's, take it back a step a little bit, is one of the problems with discussing group hug, is I think it's kind of a difficult thing to define a little bit. You wouldn't think it would be. And way back in the early days of the EDH Recast, we had a little show where Joey and I debated group hug, and Matt kind of moderated it. And one of the problems I kind of realized halfway through is my definition or what I thought of as a group hug deck wasn't necessarily what Joey thought of as a group hug deck. So we're talking about his Kineas and Tiro deck. That's a group hug deck, I guess, but the advantage you're getting is significantly more than the advantage everyone else is getting. And that's where things get blurry, I think, for me, for in terms of like what you define as a group hug deck, because yes, you are giving your opponent stuff, but you're getting more. And I feel like in some cases, that's just an offset for your advantage. When I blow up your Cabal Coffers and give you a 3/3 Beast with Beast Within, I'm not playing group hug. I'm giving you a 3/3 Beast to offset the thing I'm gaining myself, which is destroying your Cabal Coffers. Kineas and Tiro, I think, plays a bit like that. I think it's almost closer to a Beast Within than it is a group hug. The price you're paying for the resources you're getting is you're giving everyone else a little bit of resources. And I think that's where the line gets really blurry in terms of group hug, at least for me. When I think of group hug, I'm thinking of you are just giving away gifts, and the hope is people don't attack you because they want to keep getting stuff, or you are going to take more advantage of the gifts you're giving because your deck is built around getting those things and you're going to be able to find that combo faster or whatever it is. Versus I think some people look at what is functionally a Beast Within transaction and they're like, the thing you're giving them is not nearly as good as what you're giving. That's a penalty on you, not a gift to them. The 2 cards off Arcane Denial isn't a gift to someone else. It's a penalty you're paying for countering their spell for only 2 mana and replacing itself. So that's where I think, for me at least, I'm not saying I'm right and I'm not saying everyone else is wrong.
Sure.
But when I think of group hug, I'm thinking of purely a deck that's designed to give stuff away versus one where I feel like the things you're giving away are a penalty that you are paying for getting more, if that makes sense.
It does. And, you know, you kind of, you referred to it earlier when you said, when you're talking about political decks, one of the mainstay political decks is group hug. And it's like, okay, well, what's a political deck?
Right.
And then you go into what can be a political deck and you go into group hug and it's, well, what is group hug? And so it's these undefined things. Like, people know what an aggro deck is.
Right.
It's going to be aggressive, right? And we're talking a little bit more abstract. I'm with you for the most part. For me, group hug is, I'm giving symmetrical value to the table. And regardless of what I'm getting, I'm still giving symmetrical value to everybody else. So I'm not putting any one person in a position to succeed. It's not necessarily just a Kingmaker deck.
Sure.
Because I want to ramp up. I want everybody to be able to go fast, do big stuff, splashy things, battle cruiser magic. I want to enable. everybody to succeed. And hopefully, in doing so, I can put myself in the best position to take advantage of all of these resources and extra things that we're doing. At the very least, I want to enable everybody to have the most fun they possibly can. Every once in a while, I'd say probably 1 out of every 7 or 8 games, it goes the wrong way because now everybody has too many resources, so everybody has an answer for everything, so it all slows down. But most times, it's the best way for me to get a big game for everybody to do the cool pop-off thing without making the game 2.5 hours long.
Sure.
That's kind of where I lean into that. I want to get as much fun and as many games as possible and get people doing stuff, and hopefully I get to win once or twice. I don't want to just put Nitro into the full game for everybody else. I want to try and win.
And that's where it gets tricky, too. Finding that balance, the things you're giving away, but finding a way to still turn it to your advantage and win a game. So, Max, you aren't, I believe, the biggest fan of Group Hug. Why don't you share with us why that is, first of all?
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan. I think Mike hit it right away. Group Hugs tend to give everybody more gas than they are prepared to play with right in the beginning of the game. And some of my decks might be built for that. Some of my decks might not be built for that. But all in all, my decks aren't built enough to compete with 3 other decks that are moving that fast. Especially the one that knows they started with the race car. Every deck has an explosive turn, but when you're allowing the other players in the game to play additional lands or play additional permanents, eventually someone does get ahead of everybody. Typically, it is the person playing the Group Hug deck, but like Mike said, every now and then it becomes the person who isn't playing the Group Hug deck and they just get lucky or whatever, and I like to play a more slow game, and I think adding all that expedited card draw and free stuff just sometimes isn't what I'm looking to play against when I play EDH.
So more of a methodical approach, and then when we're talking about everybody speeding everything up, well, that is a conversation that I tend to try and have before I play anything. Right? We talk about the rule 0 of, okay, what kind of decks, what kind of power level, all of that good stuff. But if you're looking for a game that's, more methodical and building up and having that kind of crescendo instead of just bam, all of this right off the bat, well, then I wouldn't even want to play a Group Hug deck because I know that that's not going to be enjoyable for your experience at the table. You know what I mean? It has to be a conversation and an understanding before decks even come out of their boxes to make sure that this is something that people would be, wanting to do.
For sure. And I think it extends even beyond just individual matchup. I'm not a huge fan of Group Hug either necessarily, and I think part of the reason is it doesn't mesh well with my brew style or my play style, frankly. In all of my decks, really. One of the things I tended to do when I brew is I tend to build for incremental advantage. So my decks are built to play well, but I also want to nibble around the edges and gain more cards than everybody else by maximizing what I'm doing. I love Knight's Whisper is one of my favorite cards. Trade 2 of my life to draw 2 cards, put me up 1 card. It's only 2 mana. It usually doesn't interfere with your turn. It's the kind of thing that you can make your play and then use your spare mana to be up 1 card. Those are the kind of things I like to do in a game. Group Hug tends to neuter those things. When everyone's drawing 3 or 4 cards a turn, then you drawing that 1 extra card is much less impactful than when you are functionally drawing twice as many cards as everybody else. So if everyone's drawing 1 and you wind up drawing an extra 1 off Knight's Whisper, you're getting twice as many cards in hand. When everyone's drawing 4 because of the Group Hug player and you draw 5, that's much less impactful on your deck. And so then it feels like Group Hug kind of neuters a lot of the things my decks are generally designed to do. And the second thing about it, I think, is because I don't play combo, there's very rarely 1 card I'm trying to get down to. Whereas when someone is playing combo, it makes it so much easier for them to find that combo. So not only does it kind of file the advantages off my deck, it helps decks that are built different than mine find their win much easier. So I'm losing while someone else is gaining. That's probably the most frustrating thing for me. Or I know frustrating is the right word, but that's one of the reasons I tend to not like to play against Group Hug, because it just coincidentally enough lines up very poorly against the way I tend to brew.
You hit that right on the head, Dana.
Yeah, and I think, to a degree, we all kind of play that similar game, too. Chris, I think you definitely do. As someone who comes from Modern, you bring a lot of those Modern sensibilities over to your decks. You love those Faithless Voting kind of cards to improve your card quality in the same way that I like a Knight's Whisper. And yeah, I think the same. It impacts you the same way, I think.
Yeah, it does. Though I think the biggest part about Group Hug for me is the fact that I've never played against a Group Hug player who's actually winning the game. They're always
Sure.
just sitting back, doing all this stuff, giving everything to everyone else, and they're not getting anywhere ahead on them with themselves. So they're just letting the other people win the game. So it's kind of like it takes away from the actual gameplay that I like, where everyone's, in it to win. Whereas, when I sit down with Group Hug, that one person just sitting back and just like, okay, I just want to see who wins. That's all I care about. I don't care if I win or not.
It's easy to play Group Hug badly.
That is absolutely true. Of everything that we have said, that is where I will agree with you the most.
And maybe that's where a lot of my distaste comes towards Group Hug is I'm in that boat. I haven't seen it played well. Yes, I've played against people who have done Group Hug well, but the amount of those players versus the amount of times I've played where you're in the situation like Chris described, they just sit there and twiddle their thumbs and gets to just see the big explosion of fun. Those aren't the games like I remember fondly.
Well, at that point, the difference between when someone's playing that style Group Hug deck, the difference between Group Hug and Chaos is pretty small. Like, there's not a lot of difference between someone who's just throwing out a Howling Mine and Rites of Flourishing and, randomly casting a wheel or something later on. The difference between that and people running like a true red Chaos deck, those cleave pretty close together at some point without maybe the person piloting it even really realizing it.
So I'm not feeling assaulted here by any means, but if it would please the court, please allow me to defend myself.
For sure.
So when you're talking about just gas for gas sake, and they're not trying to win, they're just playing Kingmaker for the entire table, you're absolutely right. Drives me nuts, makes me go crazy, because then this is the kind of conversation we have, right? When we're talking about enabling decks differently, because if we have a more methodical approach, or if somebody else is playing a combo deck, obviously giving more access to resources means that it's not just the rising tide that lifts all boats. If somebody has pieces that they're going to be able to get to that they need specifically, and other people have to build an entire board state, well, then those extra resources are going to make a difference depending on if it's extra mana or extra card draw or giving creatures or whatever it is. But what I try to do is, if somebody's playing a combo piece, or if somebody's playing a combo deck, I totally get that. I also want to make sure that I'm giving everybody enough card draw to also find their answers for it. There are times where if somebody plays the Urza deck, I'm not going to play Group Hug. I don't need that in my life. Nobody needs that in their life, right? Because Urza is a hug itself kind of thing. The other part of this, so help me out a little bit here, because I've heard two different sides. One of them is, I don't really like Group Hug, because when I play against Group Hug, every once in a while somebody plays it well, and then the rest of the time it seems like it's just giving gas to the table. And the other time, sometimes it's something that benefits one of the other players because they're playing a deck that more synergizes it, but it's also the Group Hug player that is giving themselves more benefit because they have proper assessment of all of these resources. So I don't know if the Group Hug player is good or bad in this scenario. Sure. I just know that we don't like them.
Yeah, it becomes tricky to tell those things apart, I guess, sometimes, for sure. Well, so here's an example when I think of the Group Hug deck that I'm not sure is a Group Hug deck. So this might kind of lead into that. Mm-hmm. Jumbo Commander had a Braids Conjure Adept mono blue deck, and I think he still does. Yeah. And he never really called it a Group Hug deck, but it played that way a little bit, or at least people convinced themselves it was. Whenever the couple times I played against it, he'd play Braids and everyone's like, woohoo, free stuff. Well, except for he's dropping 9 drops because his deck was built around playing crazy to cast expensive things. He didn't dissuade you from thinking, hey, free stuff. It wasn't like, no, I'm not, this isn't for you. But it kind of worked politically without him having to say anything. There was times in pods or even watching him play it where people would absolutely pull their punches because they're like, oh, I'm going to get free stuff. I'm not going to kill Braids. And he's like, 12 drop. Pass turn. And people didn't catch that for some reason. It was a really interesting way to play politics and play group hugs there, he was clearly getting a large advantage off Braids over everybody else. But people, maybe because he didn't call it group hug, I don't know, people just were like, they just kind of thought it was and went along with it.
I'm almost at the point where I do want to call it group hug because that's the way that I play it. But I think it would almost be more fair to call it group value because the entire premise is I'm going to give people value. I'm going to give people more access to resources that they wouldn't have without my deck playing the way that it does. And then how you take that value and what you have in the rest of your deck is what it's going to actually turn into. And I know that might sound disingenuous right after we talk about the Braids deck. Like, here's the question. Is Braids a group hub card? Sometimes, kind of. Depends on what you build the rest of it with, right? Because if you Braids turn 3 or 4 and then turn 5, you bring out an It that betrays, that doesn't feel very group huggy. I totally get it. But as far as, making sure that it's something where we get value for the table. That's where I try to lean into group hug because my goal with this deck, I want to win.
Oh, yeah.
But it also is a determinant of what's winning to you. Me winning is everybody getting to pop off or having a chance to win the game and hopefully me actually finishing and winning the game. If I don't, that's okay. That's why we shuffle up when we play again every hour or so, right? But there are so many ways that it can go wrong, and you're absolutely right. There are a few tightropes that I think are thinner to walk than having a fun for the table group hug deck. But when it is fun, it is the most fun that I have playing Magic.
Now, of your couple of decks that play that way, which one is your favorite?
So my Feldegriff deck is probably my least favorite of the 3.
Okay.
Because I basically said, I want to make the most competitive Feldegriff deck that I can without it costing thousands upon thousands of dollars.
Sure.
And the only way that works is if it's a combo deck. And I don't typically like to play combo because it gets a little bit too repetitive for me personally. I don't mind when other people play it. But for me, if I know that I'm going to tutor for this card, which is going to get me this piece, which gets me this piece, I can't do that. My ADHD hates it. But the deck can be fun. Kineos and Tiro is super fun to me because it's about, I'm going to give more mana and I'm going to give more land drops and a little bit more card draw, but it's a tokens deck. And I want to have as many give everybody tokens, give myself tokens, the Sylvan Offering kind of things, and get my extra token generators, double things up. I want to flood the board. But I want to flood the board for everybody. So hopefully I get to take advantage of that. And more times than not, I do. And then Selvala that's probably my best deck. Because it is, overall. Because it is just big mana. Selvala's crazy to begin with. Let alone when you put big mana into it and just everybody go. I think Kineos and Tiro is probably my favorite, though. That's the first one.
And I would say K&T and Selvala are both ones where it's a little bit easier to turn the advantage your way because they do kind of disproportionately reward you versus other players.
Yep. Everybody can draw a card, but I get extra. Everybody can play a land, but I get extra. And, that's where it gets into is it group hug or is it a group value? Yeah, right. Giving everybody a thing, but my return on my ROI is better than yours, which I get.
Well, that's how I think a group hug deck should be played, though, is like kind of like the Mafia type of thing, where you are the Mafia boss.
Yeah.
You're giving everything out, but it's like you don't realize how much I'm getting back for what I'm giving you type of thing.
It's the 1 for me, 1 for you, 2 for you, 2 for me.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, it also gets into that factor where unless people are super, anti-group hug, I feel like most of my stuff sticks around because the only reason that people get rid of it is they try and, I'd say I've got a Rites of Flourishing down, right? Okay, so everybody's going to get additional cards, everybody's going to get additional lands. The only reason that somebody blows that up is so they can blow it up before their other opponents get to take advantage of that, right? Which usually means if that gets blown up, there's 3 people mad at the table rather than 1.
Right.
So most of my stuff sticks around. I don't have to do a lot of hexproof on my group hug decks. I don't have to do nearly as much protection. More than anything, it's I have to have a couple of pieces in there to stop people from popping off too far and winning the game too fast. because I want everybody to do cool things. But it is nice to basically say, hey, everybody, I'm doing a thing. Please be my friend. Because I don't have to make nearly as many arguments for people to, not ruin my world.
I do think that's a benefit of group hug, though, is eventually you get enough of those pieces that are helping everybody and you're still getting the better value out of everything to where if I remove piece A, you still have piece B and C doing the same things. And, you get to the point where I have nothing to remove but the player, maybe, is what the solution is.
And when you get to that point, again, going to the game theory of it all, if I'm giving everybody extra cards, and then somebody uses those extra cards to give themselves another piece that's going to enable them to win, and somebody else uses some targeted removal or does a board wipe or does something to remove that, yeah, I gave everybody extra cards, but I also eliminated 2 threats from the game. I got rid of that one piece and I got rid of that targeted removal. So I'll give more pieces to everybody, especially if they're going to use those pieces to remove things that would be problematic for me anyway.
Now, have you ever gotten any particularly negative reactions from playing group hug from anybody?
I haven't gotten any negative reactions from playing group hug. I have gotten some negative reactions from some of the decisions I've made with the deck. So not too long ago, I cast a replication technique, and I picked the person that was just the furthest behind. And said, hey, I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate so you can copy whatever you want of yours. And I don't even know what I'm going to pick of mine. And I had some stuff that could have been real cool. I could have made another doubling season. I could have made a bunch of other stuff. And this is where I'm basically going to say, oh no, I don't want to gas for gas sake. I saw that a couple of players were really close to milling out. So I decided that I was going to copy my Rites of Flourishing.
Oh, no.
Which then copied itself because I got extra tokens, and then I did it again. So now everybody was basically drawing a new hand at the beginning of their turn. And at that point, I went, if I literally survive for 2 turns, 2 of you are going to mill out, and I have way more resources than this other player. And in theory, it makes a lot of sense. And then you're drawing 6 cards at the beginning of your turn, and you're playing 4 lands, and then it's the mental math of what every player has to do. That was one of those, okay, I made a bad decision this time. But for the most part, I just like everybody getting stuff and doing stuff,
That makes sense, and I understand the attraction to having a deck built around making sure everyone at least gets to play. In a lot of ways, it's kind of the opposite of stacks, where you're looking to keep people from being able to play. In this case, you're like, I want everyone to play somehow. We'll just kind of see what happens. Hopefully I can take advantage of it, but everyone's going to get to do a thing at least.
Yeah, is there anything... there are a few things that bother me more than being a stacks target for somebody, but one of those things is... if 3 players are playing at consistent speed and then another player is either flooded or is just mana screwed. And it's just, what are you even going to get to do this game? I can't. And it's, okay, well, here's a way for me to make sure that's never going to happen.
Yeah, I've definitely, and I have nothing against, I don't usually, I'm not in the mood to play against stacks, but I understand it's sometimes
the
fun to fight through
and
that
the
puzzle
stoppage.
too.
Yeah, for sure.
I have to be in the mood to do it and be ready for it, but it's an interesting puzzle to fight through. But I'd say generally speaking, you're much less likely to encounter resistance to giving people stuff and letting everyone have a shot at playing, even if it's maybe a little bit chaotic, than you are playing a deck in a situation where people are going to have a tough time actually doing anything at all.
Yeah, I think it's really more of you're right. It's also just as much I have no problem playing against stacks. That's fine, because that's the way that the deck is built. That's the way somebody wants to win and have fun. Not a problem with it. I can't build stacks because I've tried it before, and every time I do it, I have to stop this player. Well, now I have to stop this player. Well, now I have to stop this player. And when I think about stopping everybody, there's a little part of my brain that gets real sad. Because I'm battle cruiser. I would rather see other people pop off and do something crazy than win the game slowly. I think I'm too impatient is what I've actually figured out about myself today. Thank you for this therapy session, guys.
You're welcome. We will bill you.
So, you have any advice for anyone who wants to build group hug, but to do it right?
Sure.
It could be building, it could be how to play it. Anything in general that would just help people out with this type of theory crafting for a deck like this.
Okay. So I actually talked about this with MTG in Quarantine not too long ago, and most people, everybody has their own way of deck building. Sometimes it's I have a commander and I want to build around it. Sometimes it's I want to build a deck that does blank, right? What I say is, if you're trying to build a group hug deck, first thing I do is say, how do you want the deck to win? Because that's often what gets lost if you're making a group hug deck. Well, how does the deck win? Well, it doesn't. Well, then that's not a very fun deck, because all you're doing is just pumping everybody else up. Figure out how you want the deck to win, and then bring yourself backwards from that. Because the other factor that happens with Magic cards is Wizards of the Coast, if they build symmetrical value, or they build cards that give value to your opponents, typically what happens with those cards is they have a significantly reduced mana cost versus something that just gave it to yourself. So I say, build your win cons, and then figure out how fast you can get to those. If you want to do the tutor thing, if you want to do a combo piece, whatever it is, that's fine. But what ends up happening more times than not is as you're building your way backwards and you're giving yourself as much value as possible while also allowing yourself to give it to everybody else at the table, one of two things happens. You either find, oh, I'm able to get these pieces out a lot faster, and then it's just about me to give everybody everything, but also keep things kind of in control. Or you build a group hug deck, then decide, I should build this deck instead of being group hug, I should just make it a combo deck or something along those lines, and you still have a lot of fun with it. I think you go in with the win con first, and then work your way backwards, just saying, I'm going to get as much value to get to that win con. There are very few group hug decks that win with a, low mana, low card draw kind of way. Typically, they're something that are going to combo off, or they're just going to make a bunch of resources to go in, whatever it is. Find your win con, then put things in your deck that are going to help yourself and everybody to achieve your own win cons. Typically, it works.
I never thought about it that way.
I fell into the trap early that we already talked about making a group hug deck, and all it does is just give benefit to everybody. It doesn't ever do anything on its own, right? So all I do is hope to stick around and be the second place finisher as a kingmaker.
Yeah.
It wasn't fun. It wasn't fun for me. It wasn't fun for anybody else. People popped off, but then I just kind of hung around and, all right, I'll go ahead and play Dictate of Karametra, and now all of your mana is worth 3 times as much. Have fun. That's not me interacting with the board. That's basically me just being, if we were playing Plane Chase, I'm just the plane for this 3-player game, because all I'm doing is I'm giving benefit. So to figure out how you want to win, start with that, and then work your way backwards instead of, the traditional way. It's worked for me a few times.
So Mike, I think we'll kind of start wrapping up, but I have one more question. Mm-hmm. Out of all the new cards in 2021, have there any been that really shine in a group hug deck, in your opinion?
Oh boy. So here's the thing. Strixhaven was really interesting because that leaned more into the political side with the Silver Quill. But there were a couple of things in there that I enjoyed about that. Demonstrate, even though it's not symmetrical, but the ability to give somebody an extra thing to give yourself the thing twice, had a lot of fun with that. Man, now I gotta think about cards from specifically this year. You got me perplexed here.
How about Secret Rendezvous? Or is that just too blatantly like the draw 3, give someone else 3 thing?
You know what? Here's the thing. I love that card, and it's one of the biggest disagreements that Alex and I have on the podcast. I think that's a great card because it's 3, as far as I'm concerned, it's 3 mana in white to draw 6 cards. Because if I'm working with somebody and I give somebody that ability to draw 3 more cards, I'm making some kind of arrangement with them. It's not necessarily like, oh, hey, you can't hurt me. But if it's hey, do you have answers in your deck to what's happening here? Okay, I'm gonna help you dig for it, and I'm gonna dig at the same time. So if I'm making a friend, even if it's just for that moment, I'm drawing 6 cards for us rather than 3 cards for me and 3 cards for an opponent. I do like that card a lot. I thought that the Strixhaven Stadium card got slept on way too much because I love that whenever 3 mana artifact, tap, add a colorless mana, and put a counter on it. Whenever you deal damage with a creature to a player, combat damage, put a counter on it. Then, if you have 10 or more counters, you may remove all counters from it and remove a player that you hit from the game. That's insane to me. Now, maybe that's because I'm playing a group hug tokens deck, but the idea of working with your opponents to say, hey, this player is arch enemy, they're going to go off. If I can make one thing hit him, will you two collectively take 7 damage from me so I can get this to 10 counters? That kind of stuff. I love that kind of stuff, because when you talk about solving the puzzle for stacks, I like solving the puzzle for the table as far as this is the biggest problem. How do we figure this out? Here's a cool political card with it. Neat. I want to give everybody assets to figure out how to get the game as big and powerful as possible. Man, as far as one specifically from this year, I've got too many decks, guys. I gotta look at this stuff.
I have been there for sure. The one, thinking about going back briefly to Secret Rendezvous, I've only cast it, I think, once in the deck where I'm running it. And I just wanted to try it out. I really didn't know how it was going to play. And at least I would say the one time I cast it, the one time I thought was interesting was there was a person who I was going to kill that turn, and I top deck Secret Rendezvous, and I'm like, they're tapped out. Okay, we're both going to draw 3 cards. And I drew my 3 cards, and I'm going to attack you for lethal. And I don't know how often that happens, but I also feel like that probably is a situation you find yourself in often enough with that card as well. Even if it isn't political, it's probably one where you can look around and go, this person, even if they draw 3 cards, probably isn't going to be a threat for multiple turns. That's a pretty safe play to make. I'm just going to draw my 3, give them 3, and I'm also not in first place. So even if they do draw something that's really powerful, it's probably not coming my way. I do feel like even without any overt deals, that card is maybe safer than people realize.
Oh, yeah. It's card draw in white, and it's fair value card draw in white. And at a certain point, I'm almost in the, hey, even if it's not a group hug deck, even if that's not the theme, if it's not political, whatever, how many times are you going to draw Secret Rendezvous
mono white, right?
In mono white and go, well, I don't want to give somebody 3 cards if I get 3 cards. There's always going to be someone that you can target, even if you have to hold on to it for a turn.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Well, Mike, hey, thanks a lot for joining us here and talking about the politics and group hug. We appreciate having you on, and we appreciate you supporting us. So thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, everybody. I know I might not assuage you onto group hug, but I promise there are good group hug decks out there. There are good group hug players out there. I hope you find some.
Thank you very much. And at the very least, it was an interesting conversation. It's kind of making me rethink it a little bit, so I appreciate that.
That's all I can ask.
Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you one more time here?
Absolutely. So again, all the podcast networks, you can find me and Alex as we do the Social Contract and EDH podcast. There we're going to talk about enjoying the play at the table more, whether it's interaction with the actual players, whether it's how to build decks that get everybody involved, group hug politics, things like that. You can also find us on Twitter at EDH_social. And if you want to see us play some Magic, play some video games, all the cool stuff, you can go to Nerdworks Media. That's NERDWURKS Media on Twitch. And we're going to do all the things there because we're nerds and we like doing all the nerdy things.
Well, thanks again, Mike. We appreciate it. And make sure you tune in and check out the Social Contract podcast. We will be back next week with another show. I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDR Central _Max, and you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia, and you can find him online at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. And until next week, I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
I'm Chris.
I'm Mike.